We now begin section 2.3, discussing forms of linear equations. We will begin with the definition for the slope of a line. Let L stand for a given line in the Cartesian plane, and let x1, y1 and x2, y2 be the coordinates of any two distinct points on the line L. The slope of the line L is the ratio y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1, which can be described in words as change in y over change in x, or rise over run. We're going to look at several examples using this formula to calculate slope. Our first example asks us to determine the slope of the lines passing through the following pairs of points. Part A gives us the points -4, -3, and the point 2, -5. You may find it helpful to label the x's and the y's in your coordinates. Since this is your first point, this will be your first x, the -4, and the -3 will be your first y. So we'll label that x1 and y1. The 2, -5 is our second point, so it will contain the x2, the second x, and the second y. So x2 is 2 and y2 is -5. We'll then take our formula for slope, which is y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Ilm is commonly used as a symbol to denote slope. And then we'll plug our numbers in. So in place of the y2, we're going to put a -5. And in place of the y1, we will put a -3. In place of the x2, we will put a +2. And in place of the x1, we'll put a -4. We'll then calculate our slope. So we have -5 minus a -3. That's going to be the same thing as -5 plus 3, which is equal to -2. In the denominator, we have 2 minus a -4, which is the same thing as 2 plus 4, which is equal to 6. And so our slope for part A, reducing -2 over 6, we get -1 over 3. We'll now look at part B. Again, we'll take our point, 3/2, 1, and our second point, 1, -4/3, and we'll label the x1 and the y1 for our first point. So the first x is 3/2, the second y is 1. We'll go to our second point and label x2 and y2. So x2 is 1 and y2 is -4/3. Then we'll use our formula for slope and we'll plug in. So in place of the y2, we're going to put a -4/3. In place of the y1, we're going to put a 1. In place of the x2, we will put a +1. And in place of the x1, we will put 3/2. Then we will calculate the numerator and the denominator. So remember that in order to subtract -4/3 minus 1, we would need a common denominator. So this 1 could be written as 3/3. So -4/3 minus 3/3 would make -4/3 plus a -3/3, which would give me -7/3. In the denominator, we would need this 1 to be written 2/2 so that it has a common denominator. And then we would have 2/2 minus 3/2, which would simplify to -1/2. Remember that when you are dividing fractions, as we have here, that you, instead of dividing, are going to write the first one down as it is, and you're going to multiply by the reciprocal of the second fraction. So we end up with -14 over -3. The negatives will cancel, leaving me a slope of 4/3. And finally, let's look at part C. So again, part C gives us the point -2,7 and the point 1,7. We'll label the -2 as x1 and the 7 as y1. We'll label the 1 as x2 and the 7 as y2. And then we will plug into our formula for slope. In the place of the y2, we'll put a 7. In place of the y1, we'll put a 7. In place of the x2, we'll enter a 1. And in place of the x1, we'll enter a -2. So notice on the top, 7 minus 7 gives you 0. On the bottom, 1 minus a -2 will give you 3. And 0 divided by 3 is 0. So our slope is 0. And having a slope of 0 is actually a special case that we're going to look at next. If you have horizontal and vertical lines, horizontal lines, which remember are written only with the variable y, so oftentimes y is equal to a number, makes a horizontal line, those have a slope of 0. And vertical lines, which can be written in the form x is equal to some number, but only an x in the equation, they have an undefined slope. So let's try an example. So let's say that we have the equation (4x minus 3y is equal to 12). And the directions are asking us to determine the slope of the line defined by the equation. So let's take our equation, 4x minus 3y is equal to 12. And remember that our job is to find the slope. And I know that in order to find the slope, I need to have 2 points. So let's begin by finding 2 points on this line. I know from the last section that a particular point that is easy to find is an intercept point. So I'm going to go ahead and let x equal 0 for one point, and I'm going to let y equal 0 for the other point. So if x is equal to 0, I'm going to take my equation and I'm going to plug 0 in for x. So I have 4 times 0 minus 3 times y is equal to 12. The 4 times 0 cancels. I have negative 3y is equal to 12. And dividing by negative 3 tells me that the y is equal to negative 4. All right, so that is one of the 2 points that we're going to need. For the other point, I'm going to take my equation, 4x minus 3y is equal to 12, and I'm going to put a 0 in for the y. The 3 times 0 will cancel, leaving me 4x is equal to 12. Dividing by 4, x is equal to 3. And so here is the other point that we're going to use, the point 3, 0. So using those 2 points, we want to plug into our slope formula. Remember, your slope formula is y2 minus y1 divided by x2 minus x1. Go ahead and label your points if you find that helpful. The 0, negative 4 would be the x1 and the y1. The 3, 0 would be the x2 and the y2. And let's plug into our equation. So y2 minus y1, y2 is 0, and y1 is negative 4. x2 is 3, and x1 is 0. And so on the top, 0 minus a negative 4 gives me a positive 4, and on the bottom, 3 minus 0 gives me 3, and so my slope will be 4/3. And that will be part A of our example. Let's move on to part B. Part B gives me the equation 2x plus 7y is equal to 9. So 2x plus 7y is equal to 9. And again, our job is to find the slope. We need 2 points in order to find the slope. And so let's look at what 2 points we want to use. If I let x equal 0 in finding one of my intercepts, I would plug a 0 in for the x. This first term would fall out. I would have 7y is equal to 9. And dividing both sides by 7, I would have y is equal to 9/7. If we let the y value equal 0, we would write our equation 2x plus 7 times 0 is equal to 9. The 7 times 0 would cancel, leaving me 2x is equal to 9. Dividing both sides by 2, we would see that the x value is 9/2. So now we have our 2 points, and so we need to calculate our slope. All right, so our points are 0 and 9/7. That is the x1 and the y1. And we have 9/2 and 0, and that is the x2 and the y2. So we will plug into our slope formula on the top. We will have y2, which is 9/2, minus y1, which is 9/7. No, I'm sorry. Let me fix that. The y2 is 0. And the y1 is 9/7. The x2 on the bottom is 9/2. And the x1 is 0. And so when we subtract, we'll have a negative 9/7 divided by a positive 9/2. Again, remember that you cannot divide fractions, so instead you are going to write the first one down as it is, and you're going to multiply by the reciprocal of the second. And so we will be multiplying negative 9/7 times 2/9. When you do that, the 9's will cancel, leaving you a slope of negative 2/7. And that will be the answer for part B. Returning to our problem, part C asked me to find the slope of x is equal to negative 3/4. Notice that there's only one variable, which tells me that it's either a vertical or a horizontal line. Because it only has an x, I know that this is a vertical line. And if you remember, we said that vertical lines have an undefined slope. So we simply say here on our example that the slope is undefined, and we are done. On part D, y is equal to 9. We know that if it only has a y, it represents a horizontal line. And again, if we look back, horizontal lines always have a slope of 0. And so we can say that our slope is equal to 0. Notice there's nothing to work out in either of the horizontal or the vertical line case. We simply need to remember that vertical lines have an undefined slope and horizontal lines have a slope equal to 0.